So back in 1994, Nas asked the question, whose world is this? Sampling Tila Rock. And at least for the next hour and a half, the world will be Nas's, as we talk about the hip-hop artist Nas and his legendary 1994 release, Illmatic. Joining me for this venture, to my right, is Dr. James Peterson, professor of English at Bucknell University, earned a PhD from the University of Pennsylvania in English, and of course is a 1993 Duke University graduate, also in English. And of course, to the right is the legendary hip-hop producer and DJ, Ninth Wonder.
Legendary, wow.
Right. And the two of us, Ninth Wonder and I, for the last 6 weeks, 7 weeks, almost 2 months, I guess, have been co-piloting this class, Sampling Soul, in which we've looked at the politics of sampling, the cultural impact of sampling, and talked about intellectual property law and a range of things. This evening, we chose to look at Illmatic, because on one hand, obviously it's a legendary recording. When most folks think about some of the best hip-hop recordings that have been done in the last 20 years, Illmatic inevitably is at the top of the list. When folks talk about some of the most legendary lyricists and performers ever, inevitably Nas is also at the top of that list. And so much so that a few months ago, Born to Use Mics, reading Nas's Illmatic, an edited volume by Mike Eric Dyson and 𝐀𝐨𝐽, in which myself and Professor Peterson also contributed to, was published. And it is a rare book in that we actually have no examples of other hip-hop albums, right, that have been given the kind of academic treatment that Illmatic has. So we just thought it'd be great to talk for 90 minutes or so about Nas's impact, about Illmatic, about what it meant in terms of a blueprint for hip-hop sampling in the 1990s, to talk about why it sustains us so many years later, that when we think about the best of hip-hop, we always go back to this. So let me just start with this simple question. Where were you when you first heard Illmatic? I mean, what was your initial impact? And of course, you know, as Nasty Nas, you know, we heard him on Live at the Barbecue. Right, Main Sources, you know, Breaking Adam's album. You know, so folks already knew, and there was already kind of a buzz about Nas, right? This cat might be like the next Rakim. And for those of you who don't know who Rakim is, right, just across the board recognized as the most amazing lyricist in hip-hop history. So here you had this younger cat, next generation, if you will, in Nas. So, you know, what were you thinking when you first heard Illmatic?
That's a hard question, actually. I was still in the area because I went to grad school at NC State as soon as I left here. And my cousin was at Hampton at the time. And I think in order to understand my response to that, let me couch this a little bit. So, you know, when I was here, a lot of the hip hop that was really popular was all pretty much West Coast. So it was pretty much Dre and Snoop for the most part. And I'm from Newark, New Jersey, so I always had a lot of problems with that. So we got Jersey people out there, that's what's up. I have a much different relationship with West Coast hip hop at this point in time. But as an undergraduate here and in my first year of graduate school at NC State, I was kind of salty about the fact that West Coast music dominated so much of what hip hop was here and really was starting to dominate what hip hop was at home. And so my cousin who was at Hampton and whose ears I really trust a lot was like, yo, you gotta hear this. You gotta hear this kid, Nas. You gotta hear him. And he'd come down and he played It Ain't Hard to Tell for me. And I think, you know, when you listen to Rakim now, I think young people are like, man, he's kind of stale, he's slow, he's this, that, and the other. But you have to imagine Rakim in like the 80s, you know? He really captured a moment and really presented a very authentic voice. So to hear someone younger than him and coming that quickly, fairly in succession to him, it was very empowering to hear now. It was empowering for a number of reasons. One, because it made me feel like I told all these West Coast cats to shut up, or at least all the kids who was listening to West Coast stuff to just like, yo, we got music on this coast as well. But then just to understand that hip hop was actually producing MCs that were extraordinary artists. And that was harder to discern that in the 80s. But with It Ain't Hard to Tell and with the other singles and with Illmatic in general, it was just much more clear that the music was art, number one, but also that it was producing very, very skilled artisans. I mean, if you grew up in the inner city and you listened to Illmatic, you knew that someone very, very sharp and very, very skilled took a panoramic view of your life and put it on a record. And although I think now, because hip hop has done that so much, it seems pretty normal. But when Nas did it, and just in the context of that particular moment, it was empowering. It was an amazing thing to hear that. I think I'm pretty sure the first single I heard was "It Ain't Hard to Tell." It had a really great video on the Music Box. They don't have a Music Box anymore, do they? Which was like a real. But it was like a real budget MTV, I guess. And you could call in. Right? Oh, you could call in and like request. Do they have anything like that now? No. You could call in and request videos. And really, you could like get all your homies. You could control it. Like you could get your homies up, call your homies up, like, yo, let's go. We're gonna get it. Ain't hard to tell. And get it on. And yo, you could get it on there. So it was an empowering moment for that. In the context of hip hop at that particular time, and to hear someone be so young and with such a skill set, and also, to be honest with you, committed to being a point of consciousness as opposed to being somebody who's saying, "Oh, I did this, I'm in it, I did all this." It was refreshing in a number of different ways.
I'd like to encourage those of you who are enjoying the class online that if you have questions and comments, you can send an email to live@duke.edu. or post comments at Duke's University live stream new page on Facebook, or you can tweet us with the tag Duke Live. Ninth Wonder, of course, for you, it's a different kind of experience. You make beats. You know, what were you thinking about, you know, when you first heard the sound landscape of Illmatic?
Well, in talking about the album Illmatic, we first got to look at the albums when they come out today. There's a big promo for it. They talk about it months in advance. They strategically put out albums. Okay, we're not going to put out an album this week because Mariah Carey came out last week and we don't want to interfere with that. Illmatic came out in the spring of 1994. And if you look at the fall of 1993, you had Doggy Style by Snoop Dogg, Enter the 36 Chambers by Wu-Tang, Black Moon Enter the Stage, Tribe Midnight Marauders. You first heard first glimpses of Biggie Smalls. Southern Playalistic came out in 1994. Wow, I mean, that was a span of 5 or 6 months of music. So, as we talked about it before, the first time I heard Nas was at Live at the Barbecue, and Michael Rappaport was in a movie called Zebrahead, and in the movie it was a song called Halftime. And it was kind of if you look at the grand escape of Illmatic, that's kind of a song like everybody skips if they even skip it. Not to say it wasn't a great song, but on the scheme of the rest of the album, it got skipped. So then they released, I heard It Ain't Hard to Tell, and I heard it on the same weekend of a Tribe Called Quest award tour, on the same weekend. So, and you know, talking about Nas, it still wasn't a big buzz about him. It still wasn't a big, you know, to-do about the guy, especially in the South. It might have been in the northern regions, but in the South, it just was not a lot of talk about the dude. So we're coming off Who Got the Props, and we're coming off of Southern Playalistic, and we're coming off the thing about Wu-Tang. And Wu-Tang had so many offshoot groups. They had a kid by the name of Shaheem, a.k.a. the Rugged Child, exactly. And he was like the 14-year-old prodigy of Wu-Tang Clan. And so Shaheem came out and he had a single called On and On. So it was me and like 4 other guys I went to school with. And we all carpooled to Crabtree Valley Mall to go to Sam Goody's to buy Shaheem's album.
Sam Goody's.
Right? So
that was a record shop.
That was a record store, right. So we go to Sam Goody's. We're going to buy Shaheem, and the guy at the front at the counter was like, man, y'all gonna buy Illmatic? And I'm like, 18. Yeah, I guess so. I'm gonna buy it. So I went back and bought the record, picked the record up, and we play in the car. My man had a CD player in his car, so we listened to Shaheem on and on. Skipped a couple tracks. Okay, it's straight. So I was like, let's see what this Illmatic's talking about. Yeah, we heard It Ain't Hard to Tell. Large Professor did a remix. Right. Is where it was hard to find. It was on maxi singles, if you know what a maxi single is. And so we put in Illmatic, and the way it started And then the next track was New York State of Mind, track 2. And then we looked at the production credit for it. It was Premier had 3, LES had 1, Pete Rock had 1, Q-Tip had 1, and Large Professor had It Ain't Hard to Tell. And It Ain't Hard to Tell was last. It wasn't like it was first. And the biggest thing about the album, it was 39 minutes long. It was very short, in and out. And it also, you talked about Rakim, it changed the whole landscape. It added another flow pattern on the family tree. Nas started a whole new flow pattern for a lot of MCs to come after that. And it just became a cult classic.
We're gonna listen to New York State of Mind.
How many verses of the song does he have? He's got like 3 or 4 verses in this one song.
Rappers are monkey flipping with the funky rhythm I be kicking. Musician, inflicting composition of pain. I'm like Scarface, sniffing cocaine, holding an M16. See with the pen I'm extreme. Now, bullet holes left in my peep holes. I'm suited up with street clothes. Hand me a 9 and out the feet froze. Y'all know my stilo, with or without the airplay. I keep some E&J, sitting bent up in the stairway, or either on the corner betting grants with the CeeLo champs, laughing at bass heads, trying to sell some broken amps. G-Packs get off quick forever, niggas talk shit, reminiscing about the last time the task force flipped. Niggas be running through the block shooting. Time to start the revolution, catch a body head for Houston once they caught us off guard. The MAC-10 was in the grass and I ran like a cheetah with thoughts of an assassin. Pick the Mac up, Joe Brothers back up, the Mac spit.
You mentioned Primo, Ninth Wonder, and you know our prayers go out to Guru, you know his partner from Gangstar. But talk about DJ Premier for a moment. You know, for folks who, you know, our world around hip hop, when we think about producers in the contemporary moment, you know, folks are apt to forget about Primo and what kind of impact, you know, Primo had in the 1990s. You know, why was it important for someone like Nas to get beats from Primo?
Well, I mean,
You wanna go
Yeah,
ahead?
yeah, because I mean, you're gonna have the last word on this one for sure. Well, obviously, all the producers co-signed Nas in a certain way, and I think you know, in a moment where MCs were fairly predominant in terms of hip hop culture. I mean, producers are more dominant now, I think, in terms of public persona than they were then. But in a moment where MCs were fairly dominant, Nas not so well known, the production credits were really, really important because heads could look at that and say, this is authentic. Now, Primo is, I think, pound for pound, and this is no disrespect to present company here, you know, pound for pound, Primo's probably one of the best producers to ever do it. And I think one of the things, if you want to understand the kind of signature that he introduced into the sample-based music production, is he really allowed listeners and producers to understand the power of collage in music making. So he's still, I think, exceptional at fragmentation and excerpting small vocals as well as different production sounds. But I think what he does with different recorded vocals is amazing. Just one case in point, he produced Rakim's version of the New York Ode. There's all these different New York Odes, like New York State of Mind. Rakim has a version that's called New York, New York. And if you listen to that, I forget which record it's on, but listen to that, the 18th Letter record. Listen to that. He samples about, I don't know, 20 different people saying New York. Everyone from like Red Fox to James Brown to MC Shan. And he essentially creates a collage. And so his ability to do that is extraordinary. And he may not be the best technical like scratcher in the world, but somehow if you think of the turntable as an instrument, he's got one of the most distinct sounds. So I can almost always know when it's a Primo beat, based upon those things, the collage, the way he excerpts, the way he uses samples, the sound of the very distinct sound of his particular scratches, and obviously his beats, the way his beats lock up are just crazy. He's pound for pound one of the best. And also, I mean, if you think about the best rappers, if you think, you know, Jay, Biggie, Nas, I mean, yeah, he produced for all those guys. So
And you know, one good way to listen to Primo is listen to Christina Aguilera's Back to
Oh, there you
Basics.
go. There you go.
First 5 tracks,
There you
right?
go.
I mean, just
you
some
go.
extraordinary,
there
you know,
go.
production. in
You
that
don't like
regard.
Christina Aguilera, probably, right? But listen to
Right.
Primo producing her, and then you know that I think that makes the point.
And again, for the audiences out online, you can send an email to live@duke.edu, post a comment at Duke University's live Ustream page on Facebook, or tweet with the tag Duke Live. One of the things that's interesting about Primo's work, and we'll talk about this more broadly in terms of the album, is that, you know, Primo and Guru, I mean, their whole thing with Gang Starr was they were the first generation of hip-hop artists then to really get serious about the jazz archives.
Exactly.
You know, part of it was their relationship with Branford Marsalis, right? You know, what's up, Branford, if you're around here in Durham. Maybe watching online, and maybe we need to get you to class one day. But the whole jazz thing, right? You know, the song they did for Spike Lee's film, Mo Better Blues, right? So it was clear that these were cats who were serious about jazz. Guru, of course, did the Jazzmatazz projects. And so when you listen to what Primo does with jazz music, I mean, why do you think he was drawn to jazz, right? At this and what did he do with jazz that we didn't hear from other producers at the time?
He dug.
Right.
At the time, a lot of hip-hop producers were using drum breaks and a lot of James Brown records. That was a majority of the soundscape between the years of like 1988 all the way up until like early 90s, until in the exception of Gang Starr, which when Gang Starr put out No More and This Nice Guy, you started to hear more horns and more orchestration in music than you had ever before. And so by the time that Nas came out in '94, Primo had put out, Gang Starr put out No More Mr. Nice Guy, Delaboration, and Step Into the Arena. Those are 3 records that they put out. And it seems as if the person that was in charge to get all of the producers for the record was Large Professor. And Large Professor is the one that gave Pete Rock the record that Pete Rock used for They Reminisce Over You. So it seems like he had something in mind. He said, I don't want to go with the cast use. I want the cast that's going to take the sound of music to another level, the sound of hip-hop to another level, who thinks of as far as producing from a progressive standpoint. You know, it's not about James Brown anymore. It's about this Cannonball Adderley record. It's about Lou Donaldson. It's about all of these other records. It's about Ma Jamal, we talked about earlier. And Preem was one of the forefathers of that. And so with him, he's also, we call the king of boom bap music. You can't, and boom bap is boom, 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 cat, boom, boom. That's what it is.
When KRS-One finally did an album
Called Return of the Boom
that you
Bap.
can nod your head to, right? He went
Exactly.
to Primo, right?
There
Return
is
of the
no,
Boom Bap.
there is
Right,
no.
right.
A lot of times when it comes, other than that one Christina Aguilera record, there is no dancing to DJ. It's
His head nod.
that's all it is. And Nas was that type of MC. It's not a lot of records that Nas have that you can actually dance to. So what better marriage of an artist and a producer? And another thing about Premier, he took those jazz samples and just forged the soundscape of New York City. And he also forged the soundscape of cold weather too. It's like you can only listen to Primo in cold weather. It's like it's a feeling to his music. And that was just so perfect for, if I'm gonna forge a soundscape for Queensbridge, Primo's the person to do it, one of the people to do it.
There are some artists whose entire careers are owed to Primo, and I'm
one of them.
well, Bahama-D, I think, is also one of them. Group Home is also one of them. So there are some records that he produced in toto that are responsible for artists' entire careers. I would also say one other thing about Primo that's incredible is that he was very much committed to protecting the craft of digging in the crates. So he hated those CD compilations, and he hated the whole idea that people would put on blast what he was sampling, because what he did with a sample was, I mean, he's not like Puffy on a sample, right? Because, you know, and this is no disrespect to Puffy either, but Puffy has a different approach to sampling when he uses it. He takes larger riffs and does less with them. Preem can take smaller riffs and do more with them. So he could take pieces of music, and you even people who made the music might not be able to tell what he's doing.
I mean, Ninth just talked about his digging, his ethic, right, his ethics around digging in the crates. So when we think about New York State of Mind, right, you know, who would think to find, you know, in Joe Chambers' Mind Rain, the sample that he found on New York State of Mind? We got a tweet from Mr. Big, 10,004. There are rumors that Illmatic was available on the street well before Columbia decided to release it. Truth to that?
I think there's some truth to that. I think so. I know there's a demo version of it. Ain't hard to tell, for sure. So I'm pretty sure it was something available on the streets before.
Yeah. And we also got a comment from, I'm not even going to try. Oh, 𝐀𝐿 called me. Okay. B called me. Watching this lecture about Illmatic is making me fall in love with hip hop all over again. And so I want to stay with that for a second. You know, James, you mentioned about what the landscape was like, you know, when this album drops, you know, the kind of East Coast, West Coast thing. Months after, you know, Illmatic drops, you know, Biggie's Ready to Die drops. Right. And folks are in a celebratory mode in ways that they weren't about Illmatic, right? Sure. And, you know, Nas is a legend, we understand that, right? And everybody talks about how legendary he is. But Illmatic doesn't reach platinum status for 7 more years. You know, and we're talking about an environment now where regularly, you know, top-selling hip-hop artists will drop gold, right? Will ship gold, right? And will go gold in the first. I mean, this is an album that doesn't sell a million copies till 7 years later. 2 years, it doesn't go gold till 2 years after its release, right? His second album's already out.
There's a lot of extenuating circumstances, though. There are a lot of extenuating circumstances. One, as Ninth pointed out, how much great music came out over a 12 to 18 month span. I mean, at the way that hip hop is produced now, it would take us like 10 years to get that many great albums that we could get in a 12 to 18 month span in that time frame. We also have to remember where 94 falls in terms of the arc of hip hop culture. So that's really before you have a very widespread American buying audience. It really is. I mean, that's still part of what I think of as the golden era of hip hop, and it's not really until you get really into the kind of the post immediacy of the post Tupac and Biggie thing that you have a large mainstream American audience coming in and buying records. So it's easier to go platinum in 98, 99 than it is in 94. So that's one piece of it. I think the second piece of it is Illmatic, and I know sounds cliche, but it was ahead of its time. It was just simply ahead of its time. I mean, the idea that you could report on inner city living is still germinating within hip hop, really, and the extent to which you could detail it and paint the pictures and give the landscape of what it was. I mean, those things were all still gestating within hip hop culture, and so I think Illmatic in a different time frame would have gone platinum or at least gold a little bit more quickly. So it's just a little bit ahead of its time. A different buying audience, a smaller buying audience for hip hop. Also, remember, we're not transmitting music the way that we transmit music now either. So you actually did have to go into a store and buy a CD. And so the climate and the industry and a lot of different things were there. But the most important thing I think is that it was just a little bit ahead of its time. I mean, it's in a moment where people are the listeners of hip hop are much more invested in the kind of gangster ethos, and although Nas has a little bit of that, he's not really on that in Illmatic.
Dreddy from UK has this question, if Illmatic came out tomorrow as a new record, what do you think the impact would be on today's hip hop artists? And I think that's a relevant question, right? Because could Illmatic even exist? And I won't say this environment because we're seeing a shift now, right? Mm-hmm. Because of iTunes and the ability to artists to get their music out without needing record companies and a promotional machine, right? It's a little different, but let's say 5 years ago, right? Could Illmatic have come out 5 years ago on a major label the way that it did in 1994?
I think the mystique that Nas has when Illmatic came out, or the mystique that Illmatic has, would have been greater than his album sales now. I would compare it to the mystique that Jay Electronica has now. It's like everybody's just waiting. Like, come on, man, come on. And we know
or Drake?
Ooh, bad analogy.
No, the reason why I don't say Drake, because Drake is the same thing with Biggie on two different ends of the spectrum. Drake comes with so much more. Because see, with Nas, with Illmatic, there's only one rapper on Illmatic, just one, and that's AZ. That's it. There's no guest, a whole lot of guest appearances.
Right? Let's be honest.
Let's be
right?
honest. We're being honest.
You know, AZ burned him on that.
Burned him on the track.
Right? It may
Burned
be the
him.
last thing AZ burned.
Burned.
Right?
Yeah, how about that? How about that?
But it was only one. It was only one guest appearance on Illmatic. With Biggie, you had remixes. One More Chance remix wasn't even on the album, and it was bigger than any record on the album, pretty much. And the same thing goes today. Drake is on so many songs, so many different appearances. He has Lil Wayne on this song. He's on this award show. He's this and that and the third. Nas was just never that type of artist. So I don't think if even now and then I don't think it would still be. It's about like saying, would LeBron survive back when Jordan was, So
No, he wouldn't.
no, absolutely not.
So that's a tough question. I mean, he did drop Stillmatic though, right? I mean, he dropped Godson. I mean, he's put out records that are good records. I think that I don't want to make it seem like Nas's time has passed either, because I think he still puts out good records. In fact, I think his last 3 or 4 records are better than the middle 3 or 4 records that he put out. So it just seems like hip hop moves really fast to me. And the things that Nas is talking about and what he's showing us in Illmatic, that moment, we move past that moment. So for it to come out now, I mean, you can listen to it now and hear it's a very skillfully written record. But so many people have built on what Nas has done at this point. It's hard to think of it anachronistically. There's too many artists that have built on what he's done. Even Jay-Z, in some ways, have built on what he's done. So to hear it now, it just doesn't. I don't know if it can have the same kind of force that it did in the early '90s.
Imani Perry, in her contribution to Born to Use Mics, she has a very interesting argument about distinguishing Biggie and Nas, right? Because they're battling for the King of New York, right, in 1994. Even if most of us are unaware of it, right? Really coming after each other in lyrics, on the underground to some extent. And she makes this argument that Biggie did stuff with language, right? Bringing together the vernacular, with highbrow language. But what Nas did was to do that with concepts and ideas. All right. And I wonder, is there even a space in contemporary hip hop for that kind of conceptualization, right? Particularly in an environment where, none of the cats, you mentioned Jay Electronica, someone on Twitter mentioned someone like 𝐀𝐿. Contemporary rappers don't get hyped because they're good rappers anymore, right? They get hyped because of a package. And Nas was of that last generation where it mattered what he sounded like.
Exactly.
I mean, there are rappers who try to do that, but they don't end up being very successful. Lupe tries to do that. He tries to operate at a conceptual level that is broader than the sum of the parts of his album. So his metaphors operate on large levels sometimes, but I don't think that for Lupe's talent that he's actually matched that potential in the industry. I think Blue on the West Coast is similar. I think Blue's wonderful MC. And I'm waiting for him more than Jay Electronica in some ways to put out like a major record, because Below the Heavens just blew my mind, but mostly because of the production, right? Because Blue understands what Nas refuses to buy into, which is high-end concepts, and trying to operate at that sort of discursive metaphorical level is very, very difficult for this particular hip-hop audience. It doesn't really sell. This is a Drake hip-hop audience, even though I don't want to mention his name anymore. It really is. And the hip-hop audience is really younger than you guys are. I know you guys probably still listen to a little bit, but the hip-hop audience is even younger than you are. And so the climate and environment I think is quite different. And the artists who, and I'm not saying Lupe is as talented as Nas, I'm saying that what he tries to do lyrically is similar to some of the things that Nas does. And I don't know if Lupe's records went platinum, if either one of those albums went platinum or not, but I don't think his success matches his talent.
What's your favorite Illmatic track?
Mine.
Ninth.
Track or song?
Yeah, that's too easy.
Interesting distinction. Right?
Song probably would be. It ain't hard to tell. Like it's something.
Yeah.
But it's kind of hard to separate that from The World Is Yours. It's kind of hard to separate those two. It's between those two. The World Is Yours and it ain't hard to tell.
James, you wrote about The World Is Yours. And for those of you aren't familiar with Born to Use Mike's, reading Nas Illmatic, essentially Mike Eric Dyson, Douthit chose 12 writers, or 10 writers, each to write about one of the tracks. And James, you wrote about Whose World Is This?
Yeah, I'm ditto on that too with Ninth on the, because it ain't hard to tell is my introduction, so I can still see Nas with his green skull cap and his green, yeah, you know what I mean? This is, it warms me up to think about that particular image. I was very, very lucky to be a part of this project, and I don't know if I should even really say this, but I wasn't originally in the project, right? They had a more accomplished writer. I mean, think of it this way: if you look at this is crazy, but if you look at the people who write in the book, it's a lot of very accomplished professors and other writers, and then me thrown in there, right? And then
You're selling yourself short.
Listen, and you think about the songs, right? Because I think I have the easiest song to write about in the book. I have the easiest, and really from my discipline and the way that I think about hip hop, it's a very, very slow pitch for me to write about this song, just because of the call and response, the great production, the way in which The World Is Yours samples film and it gets sampled in other songs. There's just so much to talk about and build upon. But they pushed someone else out to put me in. And that's sad for whoever that other person was. But that other person was a more established writer. So I'm lucky to be in there, but also I think got the easiest song to write about because there's so many texts that are there. I mean, I get a chance to build a little bit on Scarface. And think of it, it's not just Scarface the original, but Scarface the remake, right? It's not just the brilliant production by Pete Rock, but also the sample from T. La Rock. I mean, it's a very dense text from the perspective of the album, but also of hip hop in general. So I had a great time writing about it. I don't know if the editors had a great time working with me on it, but I had a great time writing it. And I feel really lucky because I feel like I got the easiest song to write about. And I said that as soon as I was assigned that song, I was like, that's gonna be easy.
We're gonna ask our sound man to pump it up a little bit.
They won't act right. The fiend of hip hop has got me stuck like a crack pipe. The mind activation, react like I'm facing time like Pappy Mason. With pins I'm embracing. Wipe the sweat off my dome, spit the phlegm on the streets. Suede Timbs on my beats makes my cipher complete. Weather cruising in a 6 cab. I'm on Taro Jeep, I can't call it. The beats make me falling asleep. I keep falling, but never falling 6 feet deep. I'm out for presidents to represent me.
Even the dead presidents things, it resonates so much with hip hop.
The world is yours. The world is yours. The world is yours. The world is.
The sample is from 𝐀𝐻𝐿, right? 1968, The Awakening, right? And 𝐀𝐻𝐿, for those you don't know, legendary pianist. Miles Davis claimed that 𝐀𝐻𝐿 was his favorite pianist.
Wow.
Right, somebody that he listened to for him to get into his mind state. We don't normally think of 𝐀𝐻𝐿 and hip hop in the same breath, but yet that's what we get, with The World Is Yours.
Yeah, I was saying, even that whole dead presidents thing, you think about how that resonates in the culture, the film and in the lingo and in other songs. I mean, it's just, other people talk about making a blueprint. Illmatic functioned as a blueprint, yeah. and The World Is Yours really was that. I mean, it reached back, it was present, very full where it was, and it also looked forward in so many different ways. And I'm not even talking about the lyrics yet. I'm just talking about the sounds and the textures and the samples of the track. I mean, you think about what he's doing with the lyrics, with his allusions to Gandhi, and it's mind-boggling.
Pappy Mason, right? I mean, 'cause that's the other thing, right? Yeah. I mean, in some ways, if you think about a young Nas looking out the project window, right, he becomes a reporter in some regards, right? But also a historian, right? So he's drawing out these underworld figures, like drug figures, like folks like Pappy Mason, right, who have a whole history that explains what black and brown life was in New York. The kind of stuff that we're never going to read about in history books, right? But he has a sense of this everyday life, right, and puts it out there in a song like this.
And he's 18.
Right.
He's 18 years old.
But let's talk about that for a second, right? Because Nas isn't your ordinary
18-year-old.
18-year-old, right? He's the son of Oludara. And for those of you who don't know who Oladar is, right, well-known cornet. He was a part of the New York City jazz loft scene in the 1970s. You know, the first time I heard Oladara, you know, Nas would have been 14 or 15 years old, right? So this is Oladara, a track in which he's playing and also singing with Cassandra Wilson on her 1987 recording, Days Away. That's his cornet. And so he's exposed to this stuff, right? And again, Imani Perry makes this point also, right? Oladar was on a track called ''𝐀𝐿, an album in which they took the poetry of Ishmael Reed and put it to music. And so she imagined what it must have been like for a 13 or 14-year-old Nas listening to that album, right? And how that becomes part of how he conceptualizes his own way to be in the world as an adult, right? And he's talked a great deal about the impact of his father, right? You know, when they did Bridging the Gap, and, you know, in some of the interviews, he made the point that, you know, America really doesn't want black men, black fathers to have relationships with their sons, right? And there are a bunch of tracks, right, on that album throughout his career, a bunch of essays in his book, you know, Guy Ramsey's piece, specifically talking about Life's a Bitch, in which Oladara plays on that particular track. Talk a little bit about, you know, what Nas does in terms of the conversation about fatherhood. Right. You know, first of all with Illmatic, right? But, you know, going forward, right? Despite, you know, some of the stuff that he's dealing with now.
The thing about Nas and talking about fatherhood when it comes to Illmatic, I think it resonates a lot of the conversations I have with people about hip hop. It seems like someone has tried to take hip hop and use it as a wedge to forge between the generations, to split them up, to make the older generation say, you know, all of what you're saying is garbage, you're not saying anything, even all of the messages that come in hip hop as far as safe sex, this is in the early 90s now, the safe sex, I got my best black history lesson from a hip hop record, and all of that stuff is all of the negativity in the media is forged a wedge between a relationship between a father and a son, and when it came to hip hop music. But just the fact that Oladar was a jazz musician, and we have to also talk about the music that came before Nas. We didn't even get this mind state to talk about it. I mean, going back early, what you were saying as far as, you know, Drake coming out, you are what you eat. When Drake coming out, Drake is a descendant of Kanye West. Is growing up listening to Kanye, this is that and the third, whatever. Nas, before Nas came Redman, KRS-One, Rakim. So many people came before him, but it was a message there that a lot of the older generation didn't think existed. And he talks about that in his records.
I think we should also kind of acknowledge where Nas is from and all of the artistry and producers and rappers that you know, Queensbridge, you know, was
Started out in the park.
right. I mean, you know, had established itself as one of the regional pillars of hip hop culture. It had done that since almost the early '80s, really.
Right. And who are we talking about? We're talking about
𝐀𝐻𝐿, 𝐀𝐻,
Juice Crew.
Juice
Vince
Crew,
Marley,
the whole,
right?
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Marley Marl.
Yeah, yeah. You know, and that legacy is one I think that Nas looked at very seriously. But also, his consciousness about where he came from was very, very important. So he understood that for some young people in his community, this music and this culture was like a parent. And so I think that's why you see some of the messaging and see him trying to package it in a way that young people in the streets could really process it and digest it. And I think he does that in every song. But certainly there are more songs where he moralizes or gives us some advice on how to live under extraordinary circumstances in inner city America. So I think his you know, he just understood what the music could do at that point in time. And I think that is partially because of his understanding of the importance of his father in his own life and his own sort of challenged family circumstances as a young kid.
We'd like to, again, to encourage our 1,000 viewers to email us live at duke.edu, to post a comment at Duke University's live Ustream page on Facebook, or to tweet us with the tag Duke Live. How did 𝐀𝐨𝐵matic inspire you, Ninth? And that's actually a question from online.
𝐀𝐨𝐵matic, along with Chronic, along with any album that came out in the early 90s, you can just press play on, inspired me to make an entire piece of work. And I think that's, you know, when I started working with Murs and Buckshot and all the people, Little Brother, all the people that I've performed the whole album, 𝐀𝐨𝐵matic made me understand song structure or song sequence somehow, some way. And we have to talk about MC Serch that was in third base, because he was, him along with Faith Newman was executive producers on this record. Somehow, some way, the architects of that record said, New York State of Mind is the kickoff song for this record. It Ain't Hard to Tell It's Last. Memory Lane is a perfect number 6. One Love is a perfect number 7. That was the biggest influence of mine. If I'm gonna make a full body of work, it has to flow like a story. And all of the records, other than 𝐀𝐨𝐵matic, you know, in the early 90s, from Midnight Marauders to all of the records that came out, it told a complete story, and that's the biggest influence that it had. And anything after that was just the beats. Your beats had to be so right. It wouldn't even, you know, and coming with that gang of producers that was on there, it's like you had to bring it.
One of our online viewers makes a suggestion that 𝐀𝐨𝐵matic is a better album, right?
They can go ahead and get offline.
So let's get to this question, right? You know,
Get offline.
looking at the arc of Nas's career,
Right.
and the career, critically at least, starts way here, right? You know, has his career lived up to the genius of that opening shot?
First, let me just, you know, a couple of Ninth's albums that really reflect the structure that he learned and built on in 𝐀𝐨𝐵matic is the Jean Grae record is That Way. It's really structured. It was really powerful, really builds and has a climax to it. And I don't remember the name, but it was one of the Murs records is That Way as well.
Either 316 or Revenge or
It's
316.
Murray's Revenge?
Murs Revenge.
Yeah, that is Murs Revenge. Just to give you some examples of albums to listen to, in terms of just the structure of the record, where you can tell it's ordered in a way to invite listeners in to sit with the record, and it builds climactically and it resolves. And I don't know if they even make too many records like that anymore. So I just want to plug that piece. Let me just say that I'm biased about Nas because Nas is probably one of my favorite artists. It's very difficult for me to pinpoint one, but Nas is certainly one of my favorite. And I would say, yes, he has reached his potential. He did not reach the potential of 𝐀𝐨𝐵matic on any one album, but if you look at �ստillmatic and God's Son, and look at Street's Disciple, none of y'all bought Street's Disciple, right? That's where he's trying to be more experimental. Nobody bought it, right? Street's Disciple, and then you look at Hip Hop Is Dead and what should have been called the Nigger album, but it's also actually called Untitled. If you look at those records, yes, he reached his potential. Now, just because people are not buying it, to me, doesn't mean he didn't reach his artistic potential. But I don't know if on any one record, although I think the Hip Hop Is Dead record is amazing, I still don't know if it had the same exact kind of impact as 𝐀𝐨𝐵matic. That might be my nostalgia. And I think if you listen to 𝐀𝐨𝐵matic now and listen to Hip Hop Is Dead, wow, he's killing some of that stuff on Hip Hop Is Dead. And maybe he has more skills on Hip Hop Is Dead. But I try to keep things in their proper context with respect to hip hop culture. And so it's difficult for me to say that on any one album he reached that peak. But those records that I just mentioned, I feel very strongly about all those records. And whereas maybe before Hip Hop Is Dead, because even after God's Son and �ստillmatic, I was still like, I don't know if Nas really nailed, if he really got there, but after Hip Hop Is Dead and then after the Untitled record, it's kind of like, well, it's hard to argue with him in terms of reaching his potential. He still can be better and still make great records, but Nas is not one of those artists that I will say that did not fulfill his potential as an MC.
Ralph Ellison didn't have to write another book.
Right. That's right.
The biggest argument that a lot of hip hop scholars, purists, fans, whatever, has about Nas over the years is choice of production. That's the biggest argument. And another thing is,
And you got a little beef, right? Because
a little bit. No. I sat home and in 2003 with my own frustration about the production that it was on the Nas records and made an album called God's Stepson, and then I remixed the album in a weekend, and I was like, that was basically for me. I want to hear Nas on something else. But as far as order of albums and talking about Illmatic, a lot of people argue that his next best record after Illmatic is It Was Written.
Yeah.
Because that was a record that had, If I Were the World, the Lauryn Hill joint on there, still had Primo tracks on there, it had Dre on there. You get introduced to The Firm. It was just, there was a Mobb Deep track on there. It was just produced by Havoc. The Trackmasters got introduced. So that seemed like that was the best Nas records when it's a marriage between the beat and the artist, because a lot of people think that Nas is, not only is he a lyricist, but he's another instrument to the track.
yeah.
So,
I just want to read some of the very kind comments about what we're doing here tonight. This Nas lecture is like food for the soul. Another person tweeted that this should be available to public education in all public schools. Wow. And I think that says, obviously, a great deal about the subject matter, right? I mean, it says a great deal about the subject matter, about Nas, right? But it also says something about the kind of passion that we expect artists to bring to their work, right? That when they do a project, right? That in fact, almost 20 years later, it could sustain a publication, right? And where you literally only had 10 people to pick. Right, and you had to tell people, well, no, you can't contribute to it, right? Because so many people have so many comments and have had so many comments for it. What does it say, given our passion for Illmatic, right? And an obvious passion that other folks have had, journalists, scholars, other artists, et cetera, that it doesn't go platinum? And James, you talked something about this. Does it say something about what is valued within hip-hop culture, right? Or do we want to make a distinction between what's valued in hip-hop culture and what's valued in the marketplace? and that too often what we think of as hip-hop is what gets privileged by the marketplace.
Questlove tells the story of the 1994 Source Awards. And he said he was sitting right behind Nas, and in front of them was, a couple of rows up, I don't know exactly, Biggie was. And the award came out for the best lyricist, and Biggie got you had Nas Illmatic, Nas and Biggie, were the two biggest cats that year for the pretty much, and Biggie won the best lyricist that year. And he said when they announced it, Nas just dropped his head, like he didn't even say anything. I think in order to do what Nas did and what he continues to do over his career, by the things that he chooses to talk about, takes tremendous courage. And it takes something in you saying, this is what my career consists of. This is what I choose to do. This is the path I chose to take. So I must accept what comes along with it. But the wonderful thing about it is a lot of these records that choose to go along with what the mainstream is about right now won't get talked about in 20 or 30 years. That's the thing about it. Illmatic is our version, is hip-hop versions of John Coltrane's The Love Supreme. You had to be there to understand fully. It becomes a cult classic. You had to be there to understand fully what it's all about. And if you talk to older jazz heads, The Love Supreme was it. Ours is Illmatic. A record didn't sell a lot. You had to be there. You had to totally understand this. Our record say, well, I don't like it. Some cats say, I don't like Illmatic. Well, you just don't understand what's going on. So that's the path that Nas chose, and I think he's comfortable with that.
Yeah, Illmatic is like a time capsule in some ways. That's what I mean by. It's a crazy question to ask. Could he drop it right now, and what would the impact be? Who knows? I don't know if people will really buy it so much. But I agree with Ninth that what we see of the culture right now, like the kind of myopic view of it, is not what history will see, right? And as we get further away from things, we are more adept at discerning what's good quality and what has staying power. Illmatic is one of those pieces. Biggie, by the way, also has a lot of staying power. He was groomed to be a different kind of lyricist, and it was interesting because Nas really opened the door for Biggie. He probably hates to think of it that way in that particular moment because he probably felt so overshadowed, but basically Nas and Wu and a few other acts and albums really started to bring attention back to the East Coast. And then Big just, he just did it at the level where the audience was, right? So he did it at the big party, kind of, big, he did it big. And at that level, that was where hip hop was at that particular point in time. Hip hop was not in Queensbridge projects. I mean, it was there, but that wasn't where the majority of the audience was. So I think it's great as a scholar of hip hop culture to be able to look back now and think about records that are really strong and records that have had some staying power. And yes, I am extremely skeptical of a lot of records that come out now because they don't seem to me to meet the bar as far as I'm concerned.
We have a class here that should have 88 students, and there's a microphone in the center. So if you have questions of your own, feel free to walk up to the mic. I'm going to play Nas's One Love.
Word is born, you got 6 minutes on that jack, kid. That shit is real.
Yo, check this shit out, man. Hey, yo, go, give me a cigarette. Yo, here you go. Yo, check it out, man. Check out what I got here, man.
What is that? What's that?
Yo, it's a letter I got from my man Nas, man. Word is born.
What it say?
What up, kid? I know shit is rough doing your bid. When the cops came, you should've slid to my crib. Fucking black, no time for looking back is done. Plus, congratulations, you know you got a son. I heard he looks like you. Why don't your lady write you? Told her she should visit, that's when she got hyper. Flipping, talking about he acts too rough. He didn't listen, he be riffing while I'm telling him stuff. I was like, yeah, shorty don't care. She a snake too. Fucking with the niggas from that fake crew that hate you. But yo, guess who got shot in the dome piece? Jerome's niece on her way home from Jones Beach is bugged. Plus Little Rob is selling drugs on the dime, hanging out with young thugs that all carry nines. And nighttime is more tripe than ever. What up with Port Mega? Did you see him? Are y'all together? If so, then hold the fort down, represent to the fullest. Say what's up to Herb, Ice and Bullet. I left for $100 in your commissary. You was my nigga when push came to shove. One love.
One love, one love, one love.
And we talk about intertextuality, right? And of course, part of this is Houdini, right? Houdini's One Love, from 8 years earlier, right? And again, New York rappers, sort of staying home in that regard. Talk a little bit about this song.
Well, he's not glorifying being in prison, right? That's one of the things that's really striking because hip hop gets blamed for like glorifying these negative behaviors and negative experiences. This is not that. And the level of intimacy that is there between him and his imagined, the person he's writing the letter to, is really powerful. If you take this though, again, back to the blueprint piece, and think about how many songs are structured as letters within hip hop culture after One Love, I mean, it's amazing. There's so many, we call it the epistolary form in literary studies, but there's so many now that it's even hard to keep count. And so again, blazing a bit of a trail. And I'm struck by just the level of intimacy to talk to his homie that way and to sort of depict the experience of being incarcerated, not as a destination of preference or something that's glorified, but something that's sad and in some ways tragic.
The good thing about Nas's lyrics is they're always vivid. You can always make them into a movie. And that's the thing that Hype Williams did in Belly.
Yep.
He took the last version of kind of theme music I got playing in here, Doctor. He took the last version in Belly. The last verse in One Love and made it into a scene in Belly when Nas is on the bench talking to the kid, and you can just see it and you're watching the scene and you're listening to the kid and talking and it just hits you like, oh, that's the verse from One Love. And you can see from that scene, it's like what you talked about. This is not a negative situation. It's not negativity he's talking about. He's looking out his window, like you said, and just talking about what he sees. And you can't, Jay-Z said it best, you can't, I think America sometimes don't want to hear the ugly truth of what goes on in the city. So
We don't normally think about Q-Tip as a producer. What's he doing with the track knife?
Man, see, the thing about Q-Tip is that, a lot of people don't know that Q-Tip did 75% of Midnight Marauders, which is a fantastic record. And so you really don't understand that until you hear Illmatic, and then you hear Midnight, then Illmatic, then you hear the next Queensbridge installment, which was The Infamous by Mobb Deep, and he did tracks on there. But all of his tracks are hard, but it has a jazz bass to it. Every last record every track is hard, but it has a jazz, soulful bass to it. And you know, I think Q-Tip is kind of slept on when it comes to producers that we talk about, right?
Speaking of the jazz bass, this is the Heath Brothers, Smiling Billy Part 2. How much is tuition at Duke? This is amazing. Canada's jealous.
They don't want to know how much tuition is either. That is beautiful.
And while we're talking about producers nights, a couple of times folks have wanted to talk a little bit about Large Professor, all right, who also contributed to the album.
Large Professor had the know-how to get all of, and for those that don't know Large Professor, he was in a group called Main Source. Large Professor had the know-how to pull all of those producers together. He was the Quincy Jones for that record. You know, I'm gonna take Pete. I'm pretty sure Pete and Nas might have did more. I've never asked him did more than just The World Is Yours. I'm gonna take Preem, LES, Q-Tip. I'm gonna do the last track. I mean, he easily could have did a majority of that record. He was just like, no, I'm gonna take the best who's gonna give me the landscape I need and make a record. And, you know, Large Professor is also a guy who digs for samples as well. If it wasn't for him, we would not have They Reminisce. We would not have that horn breaking They Reminisce Over You. We would not have that record. So, because he gave it to Pete. So, you know, Large Professor this is another one. He's one of the producers that can do both. He can rhyme and he can make beats as well. It's really a precursor. I'm a rhyme. Some beat makers come out, they're great beat makers and not great rhymers, and vice versa.
You gonna name names?
No, not. But Large Professor is the one that kind of can straddle both sides of the fence. And from that came Dilla, was the same way, pretty much. So.
People want to talk about Charles Hamilton.
For what?
Well, go ahead.
What does he have to do with the conversation? Why do we talk about Charles Hamilton? No diss to Charles. It's, you know, good dude.
I guess fitting him into this conversation, right? Contemporary hip hop.
Well, in the grand scheme of things, Charles Hamilton, as far as the Wale's, the J. Cole's, and in some instances the Drake's, blues, Charles Hamilton was one of the kids that was on the XXL Freshman 10 a couple years ago. And so is this another version of, or another talk about the family tree that we talked about? That, you know, you can look at a family tree and you can see which side of the family tree that Charles Hamilton comes from. So.
You got any comment?
Nah. I mean, we could, if you want to talk about like new artists, I mean, people, it's not gonna be a happy conversation because I'm probably gonna make people mad, or they're gonna, you know, because I'm gonna say stuff like Drake sucks, or I don't really care about Charles Hampton, or you know what I mean, like, or J. Cole, where's his body of work? Why, you know, I think Wale is talented. You know, I mean, we can talk about new artists that I think are talented, but. You know, I don't think that'd be a conversation that would be a very happy conversation for all of our viewers and listeners.
So I got the academic question for you, and this is from Pangy.
Okay.
What have music scholars said about the album? Adam Crims talked about this album as helping to set an urban ethos, like a sound that people found reflected something essential about urban life. Do we want to talk about Nas or Nasir Jones as anthropologists?
I mean, I'm a little bit hesitant to over intellectualize Illmatic. I think Nas does an excellent job of intellectualizing himself in his later work, if we just listen to it. And that's not to disrespect Adam Crims. I think he's a great scholar, but I think his experience with Illmatic is probably very different from mine, because although Illmatic in a lot of other records during that same time period inspired me to think critically, it was more of an empowerment issue for me at that, and Nas is still that really for me. It's more like he empowers me and inspires me. And so I have to put on my scholarly hat and I break down his lyrics. I mean, if you take the time to read my piece in there, you can see I can try to take it to a very academic level. But I think for me, first, always with hip hop, it's at a visceral level. Like I'm like nodding my head and feeling the music. And so I don't think Nas sees himself as an anthropologist. I think he, yes, point of consciousness for a community, yes. Someone is taking some panoramic snapshots of certain experiences, yes. But anthropology seems so distant and cold and not what I think about when I think about Illmatic or other records. So I don't know about that. I would rather us come to the music on its own terms first, like thinking about the production and thinking about the lyrics and thinking about the experience of listening to it, and then we can situate in different contexts. In fact, I think this is the first book I've ever been a part of that actually like had a buzz. Like I had students come to me like, "Yo, you're in that Illmatic book," But there's also been a little bit of backlash to the book as well. I mean, there've been, it's both and. There are some people who don't like the book and people who I think don't really know the writers. Like some people, you can read my piece and think that maybe I'm taking the kind of perspective that 𝐀𝐫 takes in that. What's 𝐀𝐫's book? Because it's very ethnomusicology. It's a very musicologically oriented text about hip hop. I can't remember the title of it. So you can read my piece and think that I'm that person. But I think if you, and this is a challenge for me as a writer, by the way, as well. If you know me, you also know I'm a hip hop head, and I think that changes how you might see my writing. So I think there's a priority with respect to how we approach hip hop culture, and the intellectual approach is tertiary or lower than that, from my perspective.
I agree wholeheartedly. As far as hip hop is concerned, I think we create our own version of what academia is. The rules that we have, the rules that we don't have, they all contradict, as far as the records that we like, the records that we praise to be great, the records that we think that are bad, whatever. We are creating our own version of academic. Hip hop is one of those art forms that it is old enough, but it is also young enough that we are still creating the standard. So we create what it is, whether you be a writer, whether you be a producer, an MC, that's what it is. So I think, the way I see it and the way you see it from our eyes is totally different from somebody who doesn't understand the culture and never been a part of the culture. They may write, they may be academic about it, but I think there's a fault line and where they can go as far as out of the way we see it.
A couple of questions I have to ask.
Okay.
All right. Because I got the two of you on stage.
Okay.
All right. So we'll start with the Nas and Jay-Z thing.
Jay-Z won.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Elaborate.
Care to elaborate?
I sure will. The reason why I feel that Jay-Z won, that's kind of arguing Jay-Z Nas winning is arguing which is the better Outkast record. It's kind of, the reason why I feel Jay-Z won is because of he said so little, but it meant so much. Nas devoted a whole song to Jay, like I'm just going at Jay, going at Jay, going, and Jay said it. He's like, two of them just do. One was like, there was Illmatic. That's a one hot album every 10-year average. That summed his whole. He didn't have to say anything. Now, when Jay came back with Super, the Super Ugly joint, it was kind of over the top. But when he just said those lines, let's keep that between me and you. That just, it's like.
But if we're honest, right, and if we can accept that Nas was having a bit of a artistic slumber,
right.
The response is Stillmatic, right? The response is Godson. The response is Street's Disciple, right? All this thing that you talked about earlier, James, in terms of where his arc is now.
Sure.
Right. I mean, all of that is a product of him having to respond, to someone raising a question about his artistic integrity. Right. Because I think that was the interesting thing about the debate. Right. The debate wasn't necessarily about who sells more records, who's harder. I mean, it was strictly two artists having a debate about where's your art.
Exactly.
Right. Where's your art in this? Right.
Yeah, because we can make the same argument in some ways about Jay. I mean, Jay had hit his stride a little bit before that battle, but since then, I would also argue that lyrically, his game has stayed elevated in a lot of different ways. And I would say that before the battle, Nas was my favorite rapper, and then after the battle, I had to like really listen more closely to Jay-Z. And the idea that you could have a battle that didn't end in any kind of physical violence, but actually ended in two artists being better and two artists ultimately collaborating with each other, that in and of itself is extremely powerful and really, in some ways, outshines some of the darker moments within hip-hop history. So I applaud both of them just for doing that. But then I would also, just for the listening audience, listen to the songs that they're on together. And I think you'll probably end up agreeing with Ninth that Jay is a little bit more talented. I still think Nas might be my favorite, just because, you just have personal favorites. They may not be the best. But Jay, in terms of perfecting the craft of emceeing, is very, very difficult for me to think of anyone else who's done that better. I'm not talking about the content of his music. I'm talking about the form of emceeing, the body of work, his ability to do certain things on the microphone and in the recording booth. Very difficult for me to find someone else who is his peer. Maybe Nas comes close. Again, that's not content, that's just the form of it.
And I think everybody gets, sometimes when it comes to the status that Jay-Z is, he's an icon, he's, this, that, and the third. I think they kind of get confused. To take all that away, he's still
Still one of the best. If not
can
the
rhyme.
best. That's
Like, I don't, he may have watered his lyrics down to make a radio record, this, that, and the third, but even in his radio records, he's saying something. And you would have to go back and listen to it over and over, like, dang, he did say that, So that's...
Well, folks think you biased, like.
Well, again, listen to the song. Listen to Success and listen to Black Republicans.
Exactly.
And again, by the way, those are great songs, both of them.
Right.
But just compare them on their own tracks, which I think is a fair thing to do when they're on a track together. And I think Jay gets that, and it's hard for me to say that, by the way.
Okay, so you got 1,000 viewers. You sat there and talked a little bit about favorites versus the best. So I'm not going to ask you to distinguish favorite from best. And I'm going to give you a little leeway, but give me your top 5.
MCs?
We're going to start with MCs, and then we'll talk about producers.
I mean, how much more time do we have?
I'm not asking for an abstract of each.
Can we do no particular order?
No particular order, right. I'll give you a little leeway.
Okay, just top 5, okay.
Yay. Nas, J, Biggie, KRS-One, and Rakim.
Say it again?
Nas, J, Biggie, KRS-One, and Rakim.
Yeah, wow. Wow, this is, first of all, I should go on record as saying that I generally don't answer this question.
But 3,000 is knocking on the door.
Well,
3,000 right there on the door, yeah.
Well, that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, I generally don't answer this question because it requires, I think, a very sophisticated calculus to determine who should be
up
at the
there,
top.
right.
I'm not even trying to dodge the question. I'm just saying. It's like flow,
right.
it's different aesthetic things, the body of work, records. It's so much that goes into it. But I definitely would have to put Nas and Jay-Z in my top 5. That's for sure. KRS-One would also have to be there because, to be honest with you, KRS-One is the guy who inspired me to be a scholar. He said rap needed a teacher, so I became it, and then I became a teacher. So how many is that? Is that 2, 3?
There's 3.
That's 3. I would also have to put Lupe Fiasco in there, and I have to put a caveat with Lupe because I have to put a caveat there because his body of work is not full enough yet, really, for him to be there. But
All time?
all time.
And he want to claim that he wasn't influenced by Tribe.
All time. Well, listen, we don't. The Tribe Gate is. Hold on. We need to clear up the Tribe Gate piece really quickly on Lupe. And I'm not defending him. I'm just saying, I don't expect everybody that's younger than me to listen to exactly what I listen to now. I think that what I listen to is the best music in the world, and I think that the time which I grew up in hip-hop was the best time in hip-hop, but I don't enforce that on anyone, and I don't think it's fair necessarily.
However,
Can you pick up?
However.
Can you pick up a tenor saxophone in 2010 and claim that you ain't never listened to John Coltrane?
Listen, no, I cannot do that. And Lupe shouldn't be able to pick up a mic without saying listen to Tribe. He shouldn't be able to, but it's not really how it works. I mean, first of all, he to say that just because he didn't know the lyrics, he didn't listen to it, that's two different things. I think he did listen to, and in fact, he even shouts out Q-Tip, and I think in a later record. But I'm putting Lupe up there.
Can I please interject on that?
We can build on that. I'm putting Lupe on. Let me explain a couple of reasons why he's there, skill-wise, because he probably is the most questionable of the five that I'm being forced to put in here. I'm thoroughly convinced that what he's doing lyrically, and I'm not even talking about production because I don't know if his production is the strongest, that what he's doing lyrically is he has inherited in some very, very good ways the best of a lot of my favorite MCs. So he's inherited things from Jay-Z, he's inherited concepts and things from KRS-One, and he's inherited stuff from Kanye, and just a lot of people that I really respect and make good music. Lupe inherits that stuff fairly honestly, and he does good things with it. He doesn't just like take it and try to bite the style, he adds on to it. And so, to me, that's refreshing. And I want to put a young person in there also, because I feel like the book is not closed. And so, for me, Lupe bumps Rakim out a little bit, even though I love Rakim and I respect Rakim. I do think that Rakim has put out some uninspired music. Yo, Ninth One is about to smack me, yo. I think that Rakim has put out some uninspired music of late, and that's disappointing to me. So Lupe is number 4.
Ralph Ellison. Ralph Ellison. That's all.
Sure. Yeah. But that novel, that's like the greatest American novel. So if a hip hopper puts out the greatest American record, then they can be Ralph Ellison. I don't know.
7 MCs, put them in a line, and take 7 more brothers who think it can rhyme. And it'll take 7 more before I go for mine. That's 21 MCs end up at the same time.
I can count, and I know Rakim's music. Listen, I can count and I know his music. And more so than almost any other rapper, I can recite Rakim's rhymes, but he's not in my top 5. If I had to put somebody into the 5th slot, I mean again it gets tricky, but
you saying Lupe is better than a lot of people. Chuck D, Ice Cube, LL.
Yes.
He seems like a lot of people.
Yes. Yeah, I do think he's better than LL. And listen, again, if we had the time, I would give you the full calculus. If we had the time, I could give you like what goes into kind of the decision, and also understand my perspective. This is a distinction between myself and Ninth, and also between me and Man, is that I'm a literary guy. Right? So my emphasis and what I attach to is really lyrics and lyrical ability. And then if we go from there, beyond that, it's really about politics and people who are engaged
Black Thought too?
Black Thought would be my 5th. This is no order, remember? Remember, it's no order. It's just 5. Black Thought would be my 5th, but I would want to justify Black Thought as well, because he also pushes out other folk. Like, I think Tupac should be in a lot of top 5s, even though I'm not the biggest fan of Pac. Just understanding his impact.
He's the biggest.
He in terms of his impact around the world,
well-known rapper,
and how prolific he was, and the number of posthumous records that were released with his name on it. All those things I think should have him in a top 10. But the reason why Black Thought's got to be there is because, one, he's just one of the best thinkers that has ever recorded a record. And if you ever seen him live, he has the best wind control I've ever seen in my life. What he can do live is I think extremely impressive. I remember I saw him when I was here, and I remember they used to do this kind of hip hop history kind of review as part of their show. And, the Roots can play anything. They can play anything. And Black Thought is at that point in time, he blew me away. And I think in any top 5, I would have to have him in there.
Can I please speak on the Lupe Tribe Called Quest thing for a minute?
Sure, yes, of course.
Go ahead.
I totally understand, real quick, that, you can't, a lot of records that we love and we expect kids to know now, you understand some of these kids born in 1990, 1981, 1989. It's kind of hard. However, if Q-Tip calls me to learn a song and calls me 3 weeks prior to learn Phife Dawg's verse, which is the easiest, no diss to fight, that's my man, but that's the easiest verse of that song. You cannot mess that on electric relaxation. It's just like when they do the tributes on BET. If Patti LaBelle calls Fantasia to do a song, it's her job to learn it.
That's right.
This is a tribute show.
That's right.
So the whole thing about
well, listen, and again,
that's the only problem I have with it.
Well, and no, you're right though.
Okay.
What you're saying is right. So if Q-Tip called up Lupe and said, "Yo, you jacked up my song, that's whack," fine. But all these other yip, why didn't Lupe listen to Tribe? Did y'all listen to Tribe? You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Like, are people really checking for Tribe like that? I don't think so. So for me, if Q-Tip calls him and says that, you're absolutely right. And yes, Lupe needs to understand that history, but he inherits so much from so many people. I don't know if he's always conscious of it. What I'm saying is he just does good things with it. Okay. He does good things.
I agree with that.
Let me say a couple of things. One, just in this conversation, right, you've referenced the literary, we've referenced sound, we've referenced politics, we've referenced socioeconomic issues, right? I mean, and this sounds kind of weird, but you could actually sustain a semester-long course and just call it top 5.
Yes, you could.
All right, just from the range of themes that can get reflected, right?
Exactly.
And I'll put my top 5 up against anybody's top 5.
And I'm gonna be a contrarian, right? I'm gonna be a contrarian here, right? I'm gonna, in no particular order, I'm gonna start with LL because of the longevity. Right? 26 years.
Okay.
All right, 26 years of being relevant, right? Because there've been cats that have been around for 26 years, right? But 26 years of relevancy, right? Even if what makes him more relevant in 2010 is his pecs. All right.
Okay.
And he's still making the argument, right?
Okay.
I gotta go Rakim.
Okay.
Right.
You can't. I'm not
Right.
arguing with
Okay,
Rakim
I got you,
being
I
the
got
top
you.
5. You just asked me who my top
Right.
5 was.
Rakim, L Boogie, in her
At least
prime,
one. Can we get one woman on the list?
and L Boogie in her prime, right? Those first
Even
two.
not in her prime, she's better
right,
than a lot of people.
Right.
Yeah,
Those
exactly.
first, and you're the generation that don't know anything about L Boogie the rapper.
Right.
I mean, it's all about and it's great that she has these multiple talents, right? But L Boogie the rapper, right? Had she been a man, right, we think very differently about, right, her work, and she would have been pushed to do different kinds of work, right, without the same kind of pressure. I got to go Jay.
Yeah.
All right. And if I had to do a fifth, I love Nas, right? But I'm gonna go back to Queens or Strong Island, and I got a toss up between Kane
Okay.
and 𝐀𝐫 rap.
Yeah. 𝐀𝐫 rap could be in the top 5 just for the number of people that he's influenced in the top 5.
Yeah.
You know. But that's again, that's why I don't answer the question though.
Right.
You know.
Last piece, producers.
Oh man.
Dr. Dre, Pete Rock, and producers, not beat makers. It's something totally different. I'm gonna put that out there.
You gotta name names.
Dr. Dre, Pete Rock, DJ Premier. Get sticky after that. Marley Marl. And Organized Noise.
Okay. Wow. For one, I put Primo as number 1 unequivocally. I can actually rank him as number 1 for me. 9th is definitely on my list of top 5. Between Lil Brother, the Jean Grey record, the Merce records.
I don't want that
Yeah,
pressure.
no doubt.
I don't want that pressure.
That is pressure. That is pressure. And to be honest, I think much like, even though you're young in the game, much like Lupe, the things that you have inherited, the things that you have inherited, you have added on to it. Like it's frustrating to me sometimes to see artists where they inherit all these great things from other artists.
People at home, this is James Peterson talking.
And
This is
they
not me.
Right, that's
This is
right.
myself.
And they don't build on it, but you've built on some of my favorite producers.
I appreciate
Definitely 9th in my top 5. Primo is in my top 5. I have KRS-One in my top 5 as well, even though he doesn't make beats that a lot of folk in here would necessarily like. I really love KRS-One's production. It's tricky to figure out exactly how to put this next person on, but I would say Questlove would be in my top 5 as well. The reason why I say it's tricky is because he's so collaborative and works with so many different people in terms of how he produces. And Ninth could probably speak more to that than I can. But if I can put him in as a producer, I would put Questlove in there. Is that, how many is that, 3 or 4?
It's 4.
Oh, man.
You can say a Dre yet, man.
Yeah, I love Dre. I'm well beyond the whole East Coast, West Coast piece at this point. But I think I would put the RZA in there before Dre. So I know that's probably also controversial, but man, the RZA,
It's kind of hard with top 5 producers.
it really is.
Stuff.
It really, but I will stand by those 5 and put them up against your 5, whatever your 5 are. But the reason why the RZA gets in there is because just the ability to even like sample movies and just make it that, you know what I mean? Like, or make a sample seem like a movie or something, you know what I mean? The idea that he had most of those beats for that first round of records when they dropped Into the Chambers, I mean, what were they doing over there for him to amass that amount at that quality of production? So that's top 5.
And beat makers has a different, if you just talk about strictly beats, is a different top 5 from that.
Would you say Questlove is a producer or a beat maker?
Producer.
Okay.
I'm going to go with Kanye to start,
I'm not mad
Right.
at that.
particularly because of what he's done for Midwest soul.
Sure.
Right? And, the kind of stuff that folks weren't digging for. Pete Rock. Those signature horns, right? I mean, a thing that I find really important in a producer is that when you hear it, you know it's them. And that those signature horns, right? My favorite hip hop song is They Reminisce Over You. And that's, and that alone, right? I got Ninth on the list, and not because he's my teaching partner, but for those same reasons, right? When I heard Badu's Honey, right, immediately, like, that's Ninth, right? It has that interesting, there's a mechanical soulness to it, right? Where it clearly sounds like it's from the digital era, right? But almost like, that kind of, like Harry Weinger was talking about, this kind of ghost and machine quality to it. Dre, and folks don't want to give Dre credit. He changed the game. And when folks talk about what's wrong with hip hop, right, and talk about the golden era, it's always about the quality of the lyrics. It's about the quality of the content. You can't make that discussion about the quality of the production, right? I mean, you can't listen. You go back to some of the great hip hop hits from 1987. Try to listen to 3 of them in a row.
Man.
Right. I mean, because you can't hear it, right? I mean, it's something else. And Dre just absolutely changed the landscape. And the last choice, and I'm going to take this from inspiration that's coming from online.
They're going crazy over this conversation.
But Dilla, right?
Yeah.
Right, Dilla.
Beat maker
And I think the best tribute to Dilla, right, in terms of his ability to craft songs, right, is the instrumental string piece, right? The album, the 4-piece thing that Carlos Nino and them did, right? Which is Dilla's music to strings, right? With a full orchestra, right? And I can't think of any hip hop producer that could have sustained that kind of project, right?
You think of Dilla as more as a beat maker than a producer?
I think he's a producer as well, but I think that his beat maker side was because of all of the beat tapes that he put out.
Right.
If you look at all the producers and the albums that they put out, when I mean Organized Noise, you're talking about those Outkast records, Marley Marl's Juice Crew, Pete Rock and his output, DJ Premier, and from producing Gangstar Records to Group Home to all of the legendary records that he did for Biggie and Jay-Z and everybody, and Dr. Dre. Dr. Dre is responsible for if you just talk about the top 10 most well-known rappers ever, Dre is responsible for Snoop, M, and 50.
Yeah.
So, and talking about all those records, and Dre forged a sound of an entire coast.
Right.
When you talk about that, then like you say, he changed the sound. Everything before Dre sounded dirty, and he just cleaned everything up, crisp and clean. With Dilla,
And
Dilla
with
was
hooks.
with hooks, exactly.
With hooks, right? So you could put it on the pop charts, right? But they had a hook.
But as far as just strictly beat maker, and he was a producer as well, rest in peace to him, Dilla is probably the most prolific beat maker we've ever seen, and I don't think we'll ever see anybody like him again. Exactly.
We want to thank our audience for joining us this evening to talk about the genius of Nas and the genius of Illmatic. We need to close down the live portion of this. Of course, here in the class, we will continue on. For the audience, I want to thank James Peterson, professor of English at Bucknell University. Duke University grad, 1993, for joining us, and of course, Ninth Wonder, as usual, bringing the insight that he does. And thank you again for joining us this evening for this particularly live and special edition of Sampling Soul. I'm Mark Anthony Neal. Thank you.